Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. Let's talk near death. Today I'm chatting with Jeff Olsen. He's an NDE, an OBE, and a shared death experiencer, and he's also the best-selling author of 2 books. In 1997, Jeff experienced a horrific car crash that took the lives of both his wife and his youngest son. This experience then went on to give him some amazing spiritual insights. And Jeff, it's great to have you here. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, it's an honor to be with you. It truly is.
Tell us a little bit, are you able to go back and tell us a little bit around what happened at the time?
Sure, yeah. And it's been 20 years. I mean, it's been 2 decades. I couldn't even speak of what happened for almost 10 years. I mean, I would just cry. It was so tender, and I was in so much grief. But it was a horrific automobile accident. And I lost control of the car. The whole family was in the car. It was myself, my wife, Tamra, and then we had our 2 boys in the back seat. Spencer, who was 7 years old, and then Griffin, who was our youngest. He was only 14 months. He was just learning to walk and talk. And, it's interesting going back and thinking about that, because there's a couple of things. Gosh, when we were all in the car ready to go, and we had been visiting my wife's parents, and I was just ready to pull away from the curb, and she said, "Hold on, Jeff, I just want to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." Which in hindsight, there's these interesting things, because at the time I thought, oh gosh, come on, we've said goodbye, we got to get on the road. But I noticed and watched as she went and not only hugged her mother and father, but she kissed them both. And I noticed that. And then she came and jumped in the car, and we headed for home. Now it was about a 4 to 5 hour drive. And I had set the car on cruise control, where I had it on 75 miles per hour, which is as fast as I could legally go. And I think the most horrible thing to really share is I'm not sure what happened. I mean, there was reports of heavy crosswinds. There was reports of a large truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. But I believe I may have actually dozed off at the wheel, just nodded off for a second, as you do. And anyway, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the car. And it began to roll, not off the road, but down the road, propelled at 75 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
And they say it was a horrific crash. The car probably rolled no less than 6 or 8 times.
Oh, wow.
I blacked out for most of that. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And of course, the first thing I heard was Spencer, my 7-year-old, and he was crying hysterically in the back seat. And of course, as a father, I thought, oh my goodness, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned, and I couldn't even tell whether it was to the floorboard or the seat. I was struggling to breathe. There was excruciating pain. I was absolutely panicked. And I had no idea of my actual injuries. I mean, what had actually happened is that both of my legs were crushed and shattered. The left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been broken. My right arm had almost been torn off. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. And then the seatbelt had cut through my abdomen, my torso, and it had ruptured all my intestines. I had no idea. All I knew is my little boy was crying, and I wanted to get to him. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying. And that's when the brutal reality hit that Tamra and Griffin were gone. And I don't share details really about that. I mean, I'll share a little bit, because I mean, it's the worst hell a man could be in. I mean, I've crashed the car. I've got a hysterical child. Tamra had laid her seat back. She was fast asleep in her car, in her seat in the car there. And actually, when we when I lost control of the car, she was still holding onto my hand. She was holding onto my hand and I was driving. So she left this world holding my hand, but because she had reclined her seat back, the seatbelt didn't restrain her properly.
Oh, right.
And yeah, so she had suffered some pretty severe head trauma, which took her life instantly at the scene. Griffin, my youngest, was in a car seat, a car restraint, little, the little seats you put little ones in.
Yeah.
And I had looked in the rearview mirror, before I had the crash, and he also was sound asleep. But what had happened with him is the car seat in the rollover had been banged up and it had broken apart. And so when I was trying to locate him after the accident, I realized that he had been thrown from the car, which was just like, tearing your heart out, and I was so distraught. I'm like, where's my little boy? And it's almost like Spirit told me as well, he's gone, he's gone. So, here I was in this absolute horrific minute. I know Spencer's crying. I know Tamra and Griffin are gone, and I'm losing consciousness. And I only share those details to kind of set up the contrast. That's the darkest moment I'll probably ever have. And in that darkest moment, suddenly there was this strange calm. And it felt like light came, like light came to me, like it came and surrounded me, this comforting light. I was absolutely distraught, but it felt like it was love, like it was comforting me in this dark, dark moment. And I felt as if I was beginning to rise above the accident. And then this is the interesting thing and I was wondering what's happening, am I okay? Suddenly I could breathe. The pain was gone. I was fine. And I thought, am I okay? And that's when I realized that Tamra was there in the light with me. Now, I share that because I knew what had happened at the accident, but here in this situation, she was gorgeous. She was beautiful. There was no head trauma. There was nothing wrong. She was as much her, except more glorious than I'd ever encountered her. And she was in this light with me, but she was emphatic. You've got to go back. You've got to go back. You can't come. You've got to go back. And that was interesting because I learned a lot about choice. Here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life, but I knew I had a little 7-year-old boy in the backseat of that car. And I had to make a choice to come back. And I did. And I didn't have to figure out how to get back as soon as I had the intention. And here again, I did say goodbye. This was a very poignant thing. But as soon as I made the decision to come back, I actually found myself wondering about a hospital and had no concept of time. I learned later that people arrived at the scene of the accident. They had rushed us to a hospital locally. Tamra and Griffin had been killed instantly in the crash. Spencer, my 7-year-old, was banged up a little bit, but he basically walked away from the accident physically. But emotionally, he thought he had lost his whole family. They rushed us to a local hospital where he was seen to. My injuries were so severe, they had to life flight me. They brought in a helicopter and life flighted me to a level 1 trauma center. I had no idea. All I knew is I had crashed the car. I had said the most poignant goodbye I would ever say. And then I found myself moving about or wandering about a hospital, level 1 trauma center. I was seeing the nurses, the doctors, the families of the patients themselves. And yet everyone I encountered, there was this incredible connection to them. Everyone I saw, I knew them perfectly. I knew everything about them. I knew their love, their hate, their motivations for everything they'd ever done. And yet I was feeling them as if they were me. I knew everything about them. And there was this oneness, this connection, which was coupled with so much love. Like everyone I saw, it's like, oh, I understand. I know why that happened. I know why you made that choice. I had this absolute compassion for everyone I saw. And it's interesting. I'd grown up in a conservative Christian home. We read the Bible, and I did have a biblical verse come up as I was experiencing this. And it was the famous verse that says, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me." Jesus had said something to that effect. And I used to think that was a nice verse about being nice. But what I was experiencing was this absolute connectedness where I thought, oh my goodness, they are me and I am them. And perhaps he was talking about that, he is the beggar in the street. He is the man in prison, because that's how I was experiencing it. Like I was the heroin addict. I was this mother who was distraught about a child in the hospital. I had this absolute oneness and this connection that was coupled with so much love. And I was experiencing this with everyone, the nurses, the doctors, and then finally came up to a man or a body laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, that's me. I stepped closer and I recognized, oh wow, and I was a mess. I was really quite a mess. But that's when I knew I've got to get back in. But that was, that was the onset of this near-death experience. And again, getting in the body was no different than the intention. I'm going in, But then I was back to all the guilt, the grief, the pain, the trauma. I was intubated. They had a big tube down my throat doing the breathing for me. My legs were obviously immobile. My right arm was immobile. They eventually tied down my left arm because I kept trying to grab at all the equipment. And I was in the hospital for almost 5 months. I had 18 surgeries total. But even during those months, it was almost like I had one foot in this realm and one foot in that realm. A lot of interesting things happened during that time.
Far out. What an experience. That is, my mind honestly is just all over the place with this. At what point did you know that you were dead? Because you talked about how you could just think about getting in your body and then it would happen. Once you were in, did you stay in? Could you go in and out? Did you know you were dead?
The shock of seeing my body, quite honestly, when I saw this form and I thought, well, odd that I feel so connected and so much love for everyone here, but I don't feel anything from this guy.
Yeah.
When I stepped forward and looked and thought, oh my goodness, that's me. That was the shock of I'm really, wow, because everything was so real. Tamra and the goodbye, and then what I was feeling with everyone. And then when I saw that, that was like the big shock. It's like, oh my goodness, that's me. But that wasn't me. I was having this beautiful experience, even in the throes of a horrific accident. But that was my body. Now, once I got back in, oh, the pain, the heaviness, the guilt. I was driving the car and I was sober and going the speed limit, but it was just, it was so traumatic. And I would tend to leave my body at times. I'm almost like I just need a break. And I actually had continued communication with Tamra, my wife, during some of those times and those weeks and even months in the hospital.
Could you choose when that came on? You could control that?
No, not really. It was really bad. I was a mess. And once I was in the hospital, I did have, I was heavy narcotics. I was on morphine. I was in and out of consciousness. There were some interesting things, that Tamra was communicating with me that in context are very interesting, because the family was struggling. They'd lost 2 of us, and both my family and Tamra's family, they were trying to make funeral plans. Now, I knew nothing about this, I knew that Tamra and Griffin had passed, but I was unaware of what the family's conversation was. I was literally just fighting for my life. But Tamra would come and she shared some very interesting things with me. Tamra's family wanted to take them back down to southern Utah and have the funeral and bury them down there. My family, everyone was wondering if I was even going to make it. So they're like, well, if Jeff dies, shouldn't we bury them together? And we don't know that we want him clear, 5 hours away from home. And what about Spencer, this little boy? So this was all going on in the family conversation. I had no idea, but Tamra shared with me in these strange little visitations, which I must say were so real. I mean, they were so real that this feels like the weird, crazy dream. That was real. But she let me know she wanted to be buried near our home. She wanted Griffin buried in her arms in the same, casket. She let me know what song she wanted sang at her funeral services. Now, the family didn't know that, but at one point when they removed the ventilator, I was able to share, I've been talking to Tamra, and here's what she wants. Unbeknownst to me that the family was having all this conversation, and there was key family members that said, oh my goodness, well, that's perfect. Now we know what to do. So there was those strange things going on. And I was, once I got out of ICU and in surgical recovery, the most profound thing may have actually happened at the end of my hospital stay. Once again, when I was off of all the narcotics, I was off of any heavy, I was just taking some Tylenol. Mm-hmm. But I had another little peek into that other side at the end of my hospital stay as well.
Are you happy to share it with us?
I am, and it's. I sometimes get emotional when I talk about it, Christy. So
it's okay.
It's so real. I mean, those months were so difficult, and I had been tormented about Griffin, my little boy, because I had had these interactions with Tamra, but I had had no interactions with him.
Oh yeah.
And what happened is I was out of ICU. I was out of surgical recovery. I had been through, I was actually in the rehabilitation wing of the hospital. I was in a wheelchair. They had cut off my left leg. My right arm was all bound up because they were trying to repair the shoulder. But I was finally able to sleep on my side. The abdominal injuries from the seatbelt had finally been stabilized to the point I could lay on my side. And I had actually been laying on my back so long that I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. The back of my head was bald, from the bed so long. And yet I was finally able to sleep on my side, which felt incredible. But I fell asleep on one particular night. And I felt that light again, like the light that had come in the accident to comfort me. And I was still deep in grief, obviously. I mean, it took me a decade to ever get where I could even talk about these things. But as that light came, I was remembering, it's like, oh, I know what this is. I felt this, oh goodness. And it felt like I was rising above the hospital bed. Except this time the light dispersed. It went away. It was like a fog or a mist that just cleared. And I was in the most incredibly beautiful place. I mean, it was amazing. And I was so happy. In fact, people say heaven or, the other side. What I felt like is I was home. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm home. And it was so interesting because I began to run. I was running. I mean, I had both legs, everything felt whole, and it felt so physical. That's what was strange, is I could feel the ground under my feet. I mean, I could feel the energy, and I began to run, and I thought, oh, I'm home. I was just elated. And then I realized, almost like a knowing, that I wasn't there to stay, And at the same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I realized I've got to go down that corridor. And I did. I began to make my way down the corridor. And as I did, at the end of the corridor was a crib. And I thought, goodness, a crib that a baby. So I raced, and Griffin was still sleeping in a crib at home at this point. And I raced to the crib. And there he was. There was my little boy. And he was perfect. He was sleeping. And of course, as a father, I swept him up in my arms. And this was what was so, like I say, strange and yet so comforting. It was so physical. I could feel him. I could feel the weight of his body. I could feel the heat of his body. Have you ever picked up a sleeping child?
Oh yeah.
I held him, and I could feel him solid against me, and I could feel his breath on my neck. And in fact, I leaned over and I smelled his hair, and I thought it's him. He's okay. I was holding him. I'm like, oh my goodness, here he is. And I began to weep, just thinking, oh my goodness, I'm holding my little boy. And yet at that time, I began to feel this intense presence behind me. I mean, this overwhelming, powerful, cosmic presence. In fact, it was so big and powerful. I began to become fearful. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm in the presence of God. I mean, I knew I'm in the presence of God. And here I was holding my little boy. And I began to have that guilt. I mean, it had never gone away. I thought, he's here. My little boy is here because I crashed the car,
Mm.
I am responsible for this somehow. And I was thinking, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. Well, as I had that thought and I'm holding my little boy, I felt, and this felt almost physical too, this divine being come up behind us. And I felt arms wrap around and hold both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, as I'm thinking, I hope I can be forgiven, there was this absolute download. It's just like all this peace came, and it was communicated beyond words. I was told, there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in perfect divine order.
Wow.
And there was just this download of truth, of peace. And I did have a life review at this point. I mean, I didn't even know what it was called then, but I began to see my life. I saw my parents divorce as I was a little boy, and I saw the insecurities that caused in me, and I saw the things. In fact, I was seeing things and I was thinking, oh, no, that was a mistake. I did not. And in those divine arms, I was told there's no mistakes. And I was like, well, that was wrong, and I did it anyway. And it was like this beautiful consciousness was just saying, no, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We love your choices. Your life has been perfect. I mean, the only questions that were coming up is, yeah, but what did you learn from that? What did you learn from that? Like I was putting all this judgment on things that had happened, and there was all this absolute unconditional love that was just communicating, but what did you learn? And I was seeing it so much differently. And as I was holding my little boy, who was just a toddler, just learning to walk, and, they slobber and bump their heads as they do. And I realized in the arms of God, he was seeing me and everyone else like that. It's like, look at my glorious children. They're simply learning to walk. I mean, and I had so many judgments of things in my life, but there was absolutely no judgment in those arms, just pure, divine, absolute love. And I was also given a choice again. I learned a lot about choice in these experiences. I was told that I could be mad at God and blame him for taking my family away. And I had grown up believing that life was a test and that I was probably failing. And yet in those arms, I realized life was an absolute gift. And that, that I couldn't be mad at God. Nothing had happened. In fact, I realized that in many ways, this was for the expansion of my soul. There was just so much love. So I was given a choice that I could be mad at God if I chose to, or I could be mad at myself because I was driving the car. But in those perfect divine arms and in all that peace and love, I was given a third choice. And I was told, you can give your son back. You can give him back, and therefore you can exercise your will. You can exercise your, agency, if you will, and give him back. And in all that peace and love and beauty, I was able to kiss my little boy goodbye, and I gave him back. I gave him over to God. And then I woke up, back in the hospital bed, to the wheelchair and the amputation and all that was going on that way. But with a little bit different perspective, and having experienced what I call the unconditional love of God. And I think it changed me forever.
Mm. Were you thinking at that time that you were dead again? Did that enter your mind, that maybe you were having a second opportunity and that you potentially might stay this time?
I did. And there was parts of me that wanted to stay. I mean, I just wasn't sure how I was going to do life. And I wasn't sure how I was going to raise Spencer, my 7-year-old. Now, he was staying with my brothers and their wives, and they were, you know, kind of trading off with him. And I knew I had to come back and be his dad. That was the only thing that probably brought me back. But I was very torn between, gosh, I just want to stay in all this love. I don't want to go back to that dense, hard, you know, challenging life.
Yeah.
And yeah, and when you say, did I know I was dead? It's like I finally felt alive. I mean, that's what it felt like, because I would go there and I was completely alive. Here's where I kind of feel half dead, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It is so often that this is not as real as what we see out there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had a beautiful epiphany, and I'll share this briefly too, because this experience with Griffin and saying goodbye and handing him over to God was just weeks before I was to come home. I mean, I think it was about a week before I was coming home. And that was interesting because Spencer, my 7-year-old who survived, I mean, I worried about him. He had come to see me in the hospital. But I mean, I was going home. We're going to have to go to the market. And, you know, I was in a wheelchair and I looked horrific. And I just wondered, how am I going to do this? And I was really concerned about how he would deal with that. You know, it was one thing to come and see me in the hospital, but in real life, how would he cope? And how would I cope? But anyway, my brothers came together. I cannot say enough about my brothers. I mean, they practically lost their jobs to come and sit with me in the hospital, you know, and to be. And they were the ones that were taking me home, and they would literally have to lift me into the wheelchair. I couldn't do anything. And they put me in the car, and we were heading, I was going home to my younger brother's house where I'd have to stay for a while before I'd be capable of dealing on my own. I still had home, you know, health care and things going on, but they brought me to his home, and I was watching. Spencer was there as I arrived. I mean, there's my 7-year-old looking out the window, watching as my brothers, his uncles, literally were lifting me out of the car and putting me in the wheelchair. And I was thinking, boy, how's this going to go? And I began to navigate. It was an electric wheelchair. My right leg was in a big brace. It still has 6 pins and a plate holding the knee together. My left leg was cut off. My right arm was all bound up for the surgery they had done on the shoulder. So I only had my one left hand that I could drive an electric wheelchair with.
Wow.
And I was driving it toward the house, and I could see Spencer looking out the window. And he came running out of the house, and I thought, how is he going to accept me like this as I begin to navigate the wheelchair? And he came running toward me, and he ran right past me, you know, and I thought, oh, I knew this would be hard. I mean, I looked horrific. And I thought, I knew it would be hard. It's just too much for him to accept his father like this. And I began to navigate my way up the ramp. And I just looked to see where he was. And I realized what he had done is he ran across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. And he was saying, come out, my dad has made it home. And
wow.
He was saying, come and see my dad. And I just thought, oh my goodness, you know, and he did eventually run, and he did throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the,
I'm sure,
you know, from the abdominal injuries. But the reason I share this is he threw his arms around my neck, and of course I was crying again. I cry a lot now. I think it's really softened my heart. And I explained to him that I was going to be like this for a while, but that I was going to work really hard to get better, and they were eventually going to get me an artificial leg, and I would walk. And anyway, the reason I share this is here I was in a wheelchair in this realm, holding my son who had survived in my arms. And I realized it was no less divine than being in that realm, holding my son who had passed. I mean, suddenly it's like, oh, wow. Maybe heaven is right here. If we just accept it, if we just realize that every moment is sacred, and every day is a gift, and every person that comes into our lives is coming with a gift. Even sometimes the ones that are hard. I mean, it's all for our soul's expansion.
Yeah.
And that was a big epiphany for me to realize, okay, maybe I don't have to just worry about always what's happening on the other side. Let's focus on what's happening right here, right now.
Yeah. And so is that something that you've been able to do, is to be able to live more here and in the moment and focusing on these gifts and these positive things?
Some days. Yes.
I love the honesty.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably what got me through, and still continues to get me through. There was dark, rough times. I mean, I don't want anyone to think that I, had the accident and had these beautiful experiences and then I was okay. No, I had the accident. I had beautiful experiences, but it took a decade. And there were hard days and hard times and challenging things and tears and grief. And I
Mm.
mean, miracles happened. Miracles happened. I mean, I did learn to walk. I eventually got back to work. I had absolute angels show up. I mean, my family, my brothers, my mom, my dad, the neighbors, the guys at work were great. Tanya, my current wife, she's an angel. She showed up in my life. I eventually fell in love again, remarried, we adopted boys, and all of this stuff was challenging, but in hindsight now, I mean, 20 years after the fact, I can say, wow, look at that. I had absolute angels. I'm sure Tamra and Griffin, in fact, I don't even have to say I'm sure, I know they were looking out for me. I mean, they were literally looking out for me as I navigated my way through it, even though I was feeling alone. I was feeling very down. But yeah, there was those times when, Spencer might be there, or I'd be looking at the sunset and I would remember, oh, wait a minute, life's a gift. Every moment's sacred. I might not get tomorrow. We know this, so I would think, if I can just stay in that mindset, we'll make it through, we'll make it.
Wow, that's a really beautiful mindset too. Beautiful. Do you ever question, well, you must question, why did this happen to me? What is the whole significance of all of this experience?
Yeah.
It's a
Yes.
big question, isn't it?
It's a big question. I mean, I have my answer at this point. And here again, it's just my answer. I mean, when I was in the arms of God, if you will, and I was asking why a lot, why me? Why now? Why both of them? Why would I lose the leg? Why? And it's when my thinking shifted to what? What are you learning from it? And this was the questions that were coming to me. What is it you're learning? How is this expanding your soul? And this was the big kicker for me, because I was all ready to blame God for what had happened. But in that cosmic consciousness, what I realized is that in some weird way that I had created it, and that the whole universe supported me so much that I would have all the experiences that would allow me to learn and grow whatever it was I came here for. And so suddenly all that grief began to shift to gratitude, So why did this all happen? Well, I think it happened out of unconditional love. I know no one dies really. We go on. And in some cosmic plan, in fact, it was interesting. I remember going to Tamra, my first wife's grave, and crying. I mean, and at one point, this was years after the accident, I was angry. I'm like, how could you leave me? I mean, how could you leave me like this? I'm attempting to raise our son. I can't even walk right. How could you do this? And I swear she showed up as I was grieving and crying and hollering at her under my breath. She showed up, and I could literally feel her hands on my shoulders, and she said, "Don't berate me. I loved you enough to go." And I thought, you loved me enough to go? How could that? And she was saying, don't you remember? We had this plan. I would have loved nothing more than to stay and grow old with you. But we decided, remember, you were going to learn all these things. And I loved you enough to go, and so did Griffin. And Spencer loved you enough to stay. And at the time I had met Tanya, and I was sharing, but I'm having feelings for another woman. And she laughed. She said, "Of course you are. I want you to be joyful. I want you to choose joy. I want you to move on, because Had it been different, you would never have the expansion of the soul you're having. You would never have the insights you're gaining. And we love you unconditionally. Please choose joy and live your life, and know that we support you, that we love you, and that that everything's in order, but you've got to make a choice. You're the one that has to choose. And so I did pursue the friendship and relationship with Tanya, and we got married. Even Tanya has felt Tamra's influences, and they never knew each other in life, but in her raising, you know, Tanya's amazing. She's the hero of this story. I mean, I've been celebrating Mother's Day with her, and gosh, you know, for her to take on a one-legged man with a son, you know, and then adopt 2 other boys into our family and piece this whole thing together. What an incredible, divine, feminine earth angel. I mean, she has created this situation where I think, wow. But even she has felt Tamra's influence in raising the boys, where she'll have inspiration of things. She'll think, I know where that came from. You know, and she's never had any jealousy or upset. She's just incredible. But we know we've had these guardian angels looking out for us. And Griffin, I've experienced Griffin in dreams. And he doesn't come to me as a little toddler anymore. He's this magnificent, you know, guardian angel. He's like my Lord Michael, you know, guardian, it feels like.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Do you still feel any, you talked about how you feel like Tamra's around. Do you still have any experiences where you see her, or is it not quite like that now?
No, every now and then, you know, every now and then. I mean, I remember, and this was an interesting experience. I mean, Tanya and I had married, we had adopted the boys. I mean, we were moving on with our lives, but things, you know, I feel like I was concentrating on work. We'd kind of, I had lost my way in some ways. I had forgotten all that beauty, and I was just focused, and I felt like I was letting her down, and Spencer was struggling, and there was all these things going on, and Tamra showed up in a dream. I had a dream of her, and she came joyfully dancing up to me. She was twirling and dancing, and she threw her arms around my neck and spun around, and then it was interesting because she kissed me on the cheek. Yeah. And I thought, well, why wouldn't you just plant one right on, you know? And I thought, oh, that's because I'm married to someone else. Okay, I got it, you know. But she kissed me on, and she said to me, she looked at me, and she was so aware of the grief and the guilt, things that I was experiencing in life years after the fact. And she said to me, and she said this verbally, like I heard the words. She said, Jeff, all there is here is wisdom. And I hung on that for a minute. And then she looked me right in the eye, and there was this non-verbal communication. And she said, it doesn't matter what you did or what you didn't do or what's going on. All that matters is what you're learning from it. There's only wisdom. And I began to remember being in those loving arms. She was reminding me again that we're only here to learn, and to stop beating myself up about everything that had happened or hadn't happened, or the boys were struggling, or if we were having a hard time in our marriage, or whatever it was. And once again, there was this absolute unconditional love. And I woke up from that with all this renewed gratitude for Tanya and what a gift she was. And I'm like, I better focus and get myself sorted out, you know, so that we can carry on. So yeah, she still shows up. And then there's times I'll just feel her close, or I'll feel Griffin close. I mean, there might not even be any specific reason. It's just like, I know they're smiling on us today because we're happy. Or I know they're smiling on us because it's challenging, but I know they're watching out for us somehow.
So does that make you feel like your future is okay, that everything is aligned for a positive and a future where you can have these growth experiences?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's always going to be challenges. I keep wondering, gosh, I'm getting older. My hair's gone gray, and it's like, when does it stop? But I think part of that is the experience. You know, I mean, I've often made an analogy. It's like we bought a ticket to the full feature film. You know, I mean, we want to see the big screen, and we want to have the soda and the popcorn, but there's going to be a sticky floor and gum under the seat. I mean, it's the duality seems to be what defines the whole thing. And it's all love. It all comes from light, because otherwise we wouldn't know the light unless we walked through the darkness, right?
Yeah, exactly. So any fear of death?
Oh, no. I have no fear of death. Tanya sometimes thinks I'm a little bit Mormon. I'm like, any time, you know, she's like,
I'm ready.
It's a little morbid, Jeff, but I think there's so much to do here. I mean, I really do feel like, it feels like the world is shifting. It feels like our consciousness is raising. And you know, my boys are now, gosh, our two adopted boys are now 20 and 18. You know, I mean, they're grown. And my baby, my youngest, Aiden, is a senior in high school this year, you know, and so, and yet they're still, you know, I don't think you ever stop being a dad, you know.
Yeah.
Spencer's doing great. He was 7 at the accident. Now he is 29 years old. He's married. And so, you know, who knows, there could be grandchildren at some point. You know, there's always something new and more. So although I have no fear of death, I choose to be here because it can be joyful, you know, it really can be.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I'm like you. I'm ready anytime, but so much to do. And I want to squeeze the juice out of this life. I want to experience things. I want to help the world, but there's absolutely no fear of death at all. Yeah. Now, Jeff, I want to touch on another part of the story. We recently had Jeff O'Driscoll on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is why I was so keen to chat to you as well. I understand that his shared death experience was with Tamra, your wife, your first wife.
Yes, it was. When I was life flighted into the level 1 trauma center, Dr. O'Driscoll was one of the attending level 1 ER docs. And he was not actually responsible for my care, but he knew I was coming in. I mean, I think there was like 5 surgeons working on me. And one of the nurses came and got him and said, "You must come down to the trauma room." And he said, "Something wrong?" And the nurse said to him, "No, she's here." And he knew there had been a fatality at the scene. They get a report. And so he went down to the ER room, and I'm sure he shared this with you. And I you know, I don't want to butcher his story, but he said he went into the ER room and he saw Tamra. He saw her with his spiritual eyes, if you will. But he said she was standing above me as the doctors all worked on me, and that she communicated with him. Now, and the courage it took for him to come and share this with me as a patient. Now, he had no idea that I had had an experience. He did not know me from Adam. We'd never met before. But this nurse who was Catalyst, she had said, "We've got to go tell that guy what happened in the trauma room," which they did. And when they shared with me that they had seen Tamra, because the nurse saw her as well, I wept. I said, "Oh my goodness." And when he said she was communicating with me, I said, "What did she say?" And he said, "You know, she simply shared her gratitude for what we were doing to save your life." And I thought I thought that was her. That's exactly what she would do, you know? And actually, Dr. O'Driscoll and I have become friends, because for me, knowing that I had had those experiences and I hadn't spoken to anybody about it, and yet here was a doctor saying we saw her in the trauma room, it suddenly opened this safe space for me to say, well, I had an experience too. And gosh, it was so real. And I spoke to her, and then, you know, this thing with Griffin, and well, actually the thing with Griffin hadn't even happened yet. That happened at the end of my hospital stay, and he came to see me, but I began to talk to him about what I had experienced being out of the body and getting back in the body, and what I had felt in the, you know, in the hospital, connecting with those people. And I actually felt safe, because I thought, if I'm crazy, he'll say, "You need a psychiatric evaluation." I mean, this was a doctor, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't. And of course, he had had experiences in the ER. He wrote a book called Not Yet, which is incredible, about a lot of his experiences. Tamra and I were not the only time he had experienced things in the ER like that. But yeah, we'd become dear friends, because there was this trust. It's like, well, I can tell you what I experienced, and if I'm crazy, you'll refer me to the psychiatric ward. But if I'm not, we can listen and share and connect in some way that's a little more meaningful than talking about the football game, you know?
And so you're still friends today? You still spend time and discuss these things?
Yeah, we do. We get together. Gosh, we probably get together at least once a month. I mean, over the years, I would see him maybe once a quarter, but we found out we both grew up in small towns. We had a great deal in common as friends. We're friends far beyond the shared death experience at this point. We enjoy spending time together just simply as mates. That's all,
Yeah. Wow. Jeff Olsen, thank you so much. I love the different dynamics of your experiences. You've experienced the NDE, the OBE, the shared death experience, and how it's all come together, and you have just the most amazing message out of all of it, to learn, to grow, to be filled with gratitude, and to embrace life. I absolutely love it. So, Jeff, thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you.
It's such an honor. And I think the most important experience is the life experience, taking what we learn from those things and then implementing it to just make a difference in somebody's life today. That's what matters. The little things really are the big things.
Yeah, making a difference in someone's life today. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, tell people about it. I'd love to get these messages out there. You can also connect with me on Facebook at Kirsty Salisbury Official, and you can subscribe to receive updates for new episodes as they come about. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, and this is Let's Talk Near Death.